All right, welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shauna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, look, if y'all had seen me talking with Dr. Lisa in prep for this
Hmm.
pod, I just made it very clear that we weren't going to give a certain person any airtime this week.
Right,
Don't
right.
you agree? Don't you agree,
Yeah,
Lisa?
it's hard, right? Because there's so many connections.
It is. It's like, oh, how can we disentangle ourselves from all of that? Which
Hmm.
obviously we can't be situated here in the US, but there are other topics that don't directly center that person. So we're going to get into those today. But let's dive into our word of the week. All right. This week, I wanted to get into a word that is used pretty often, especially if you're into social media. Certainly, Lisa and I are like addicted to podcasts in many ways. And so that's another example of it. But the word of the week is social proof, social proof. And let me just say, plenty of snaps up to Dr. Raquel Martin. I've been following her more recently as she talks about her field specifically of mental health and all that comes with that in particular, and licensure and all the credentials that you need in order to
Hmm.
support individuals in those ways. And so she recently did a post that talked about social proof. And it's actually not what I thought was a social media word. It was actually a mental health word, which gave it,
Hmm.
more teeth to it.
Hmm.
But social proof is the tendency for someone to assume something is right or credible or safe or valuable because a lot of other people are supporting it.
Hmm.
And let's give you an example of this, y'all. If you are, for example, someone that has millions of followers on your page, that would be an
Hmm.
example of social proof that clearly you're doing something that attracts people to follow and be interested in your work, or a huge podcast that people follow, or particular brand deals that folks start to unconsciously assume that those podcasts, products, brand deals, that they know what they're talking about. And Lisa, I thought this was such an interesting concept because it's almost like a different, nuanced version of, I don't know if groupthink is exactly the right terminology, but it's kind of like, oh, I see enough people that support or acknowledge or follow. So I'm going to just join the wave and follow along with them. And I can't say that I haven't been in this. I have certainly been in this. I've been thinking about the number of different ways I've probably followed as a result of the social proof of something. So I do look and see how many
Yeah.
followers does someone
Hmm.
have, not because all of them are great, because back in the day people were using bots to like automate this thing to get
Right.
followers, but I am looking to see how many folks are people organically attracting to follow what they're saying and doing, because clearly there's something about it that's attractive, important, or relevant at the moment. It doesn't mean that they're the most skilled or have the most expertise, but there's something to it that I'm trying to figure out. But Lisa, do
Hmm.
you have some examples of social proof that you might fall into from time to time or fight against, frankly? Either one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very powerful, right? If you are
Mm-hmm.
following someone, they have 1 million followers and they're very active and outspoken, that you then start to think that they know everything about everything, when in fact they know something about this little one thing and they know nothing about everything else. Isn't that, what is that called? The Dunning Kruger effect, where you are super confident about your abilities and things you don't know anything about, or something. I forget exactly what it is. I might have that wrong, um, but when you were talking, I was thinking about what I do with reviews. So I'm looking for a new dishwasher. And when I
Uh,
go read reviews, if the reviews are in the thousands, right, and it has like a 4 star plus rating, versus a dishwasher that also has a 4 star plus rating,
mhm.
but only has like 40 reviews, I'm more likely to trust the 4-star rating of the dishwasher with several thousand reviews. It's not exactly the same as what we're talking about here because it's not a person, but I'm
Hmm.
trusting, well, if 2,700 people, like the sample size is bigger, so it
That's
probably
right.
means it's better, right? But that is a bit of a flawed way of thinking because it might, also you're likely to get more ones and twos as well with a larger sample size. So it's kind of curious, but I see this happening all the time. Well, so and so said this
Hmm.
on the internet. Okay, does so and so have any experience, knowledge, or training in the thing?
There you go. There you go. Well, and what's scary about it is, Lisa, remember, dang it, we said we were not going to bring up this person, but yeah, I mean, it is called what is the thing called? Truth Social? Isn't it called that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Uh huh.
I guess it is making a lot of sense that a lot of sheep are following. It's like, and so with that, I guess my caution here, even as we talk about social proof, I realize that obviously in business and other industries, you do need some type of, for example, proof of concept of something. Like I'm not going to, put tons of money into a product that I don't have any proof that people will follow it, support it, buy into it, et cetera. But when it comes to the social proof piece, I'm hesitant because I'm thinking I'd rather have 4 quarters than 100 pennies. You're picking up what I'm putting down. Like I'd rather have
Right.
fewer quality followers than lesser
Mm-hmm.
quality by the hundreds and thousands. And just being cautious of that. So, because Lisa, to your great point on doing some of that online shopping, yeah, there may be hundreds or even thousands of reviews of something, but let me scroll through and see if they're bots, or let me scroll through and see if
Right.
they're actual people with pictures, or some
Mm-hmm.
additional layer of human validation of the social proof to be cautious with. I
Yeah.
think that would help.
Well, and I think that's also applicable with a single person, right? If you believe someone is because their power and status and your
Mm-hmm.
kind of like unconscious or embedded belief that people who are in positions of authority must be telling the truth. They do know what they're talking about, right? Like those things, it's not like insane to think those things would go together. And so you
Mm.
are emotionally connected to that kind of belief around authority and knowledge. And so
Mm-hmm.
then any critique of that person's knowledge becomes an affront and an attack because now I have an emotional connection. And plus, 700 other million people also feel the same way, right? So then
Mm-hmm.
that, I think that explains in some cases why some folks are so resistant to facts, right? To factual information because it's butting up against an emotional connection.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's why, you know, it was something that I was sharing with someone the other day that was just it was talking specifically about that around you can the Stoics said something like you can silence 50 scholars with one fact, but you can't silence one idiot with 50 facts. like because there is an emotional connection with something that you just can't prove it wrong, or you can prove it wrong, but the acceptance of said proof, social proof, is a different matter. Do people really accept it or not?
Right. The validity is determined by the number of people who like, follow, or appreciate the person versus the factual basis for the statement. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So if we have, millions of people that use their Google WebMD to say that, oh, we'll survive COVID without masks. So all of us millions do that. And then we have a team of medical professionals that have been studying infectious diseases for several decades.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to believe that small cadre because these millions know better and they can be thumb thugs
Yeah.
with Google WebMD.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. It happens all the time, just on a smaller scale,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully with fewer lives involved. But it happens all the time, all the time. All right, so be cautious, y'all, as you
Mm-hmm.
look at the social proof. Be very, very, very cautious. All right. All right, let's get into phase one. Phase one. All right, Lisa. So interestingly enough, I've been following a number of different accounts because it's like Yeah, I want to hear what people are saying about things, but I don't have time to sit in front of the news all day long.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been paying attention to what's been going on, especially in the Black mental health and wellness space, especially. I know we're, getting further into, gosh, we're at the end of second quarter. But at the same time, April was a very rough month for Black folks and especially for Black women when it comes to all different forms of abuse and the responses to those abuses. And so, what I found interesting was I was thinking that I was looking for other things. Like my algorithm was trending towards responses to domestic abuse, obviously, after
Mm-hmm.
April and other forms of abuse. But then it started trending towards spiritual abuse, Lisa, which I
Okay.
thought was so important to bring up simply because I realized that here's the conundrum with it all, Lisa. And I love having these conversations with you because I realize that you come from a completely different space, which helps me to think differently.
Mm-hmm.
Is that oftentimes those other forms of abuse use spirituality and
Mm-hmm.
religion to be a balm for those when it's
Yeah.
like, oh, well, we're compounding one abuse with others, in fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so on this podcast, we've specifically talked about spiritual bypassing, where individuals may use holy scripture or even just colloquialisms within religious communities and houses of worship to literally step over the feelings, lived experience of individuals in that said house of worship or in that community. And spiritual abuse takes that to another entire level, which I thought was fascinating, a level of
Okay.
intensity where it's used for control, but it's masked in care, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we see this in a lot of different places and spaces in regard to building out structure within both houses of worship and in homes,
Mm-hmm.
discipline in houses of worship and in homes, survival, obviously, in the broader community and in the world. And so, what I thought was really interesting about the spiritual abuse concept, let me give you the definition and then we'll riff from there. But the definition of it is when faith, scripture, or God is used to control behavior, enforce compliance, or silence questioning. This is when I was like,
Mm-hmm.
hold up, because y'all know we feel very strongly around here about critical thinking. And one of the
Yeah.
major of critical thinking is questioning,
Yeah.
being curious about what's going on. The definition goes on to say it's not just what is said, it's how and why it's used. So, for example, in a home, it could be, well, if you don't do this, then God is going to do that in the form of punishment, or if
Mm-hmm.
you do this, then God's going to bless that. God's going to do right by you on this. And so, with that, I'm trying not to use colloquialisms that are used in the house of worship, just in case there are folks listening to us that obviously
Mm-hmm.
are not religious or spiritual. And so, with that, it becomes this distortion where, again, we're using uh, spiritual bypassing and other forms of spiritual abuse in the way of control. And Lisa, I've looked at some things around spiritual abuse from various angles, and I think what's so intriguing
Mm-hmm.
about the African American experience is that in many cases and corners of religious traditions, we are duplicating exactly what white savior religion was doing to us.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
we're doing it in house now. And that's what's mind blowing to me is that we don't even recognize that it's happening. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, there are slave Bibles where anything about freedom in the flesh was removed from Holy Writ. There was only language about freedom up yonder in heaven, in another realm, in another lifetime, in order to keep our ancestors under control.
Mm-hmm.
Well, shit, we're doing the same thing now in the current modern day where we're only going to refer to certain scriptures that control people. Honor your
Right.
father and mother. Excuse me, not when my father and mother is beating my ass. Hell no, I'm not going to honor them. And so it's being used to control. I'm just giving one example of many. And so, Lisa, I'm interested to hear what you think of that from someone that wasn't raised in a particular tradition or anything.
Mm-hmm.
How does that land on you, considering that I know that you are very well versed in other forms of abuse and how they're applied? So help me out here. Help me out.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense to me. And it would be one dynamic within a broader domestic abuse situation or family, interpersonal violence, kind of family abuse. Doesn't surprise me at all. And it likely keeps people in the abusive situation. And the person who is dishing out the coercion through spiritual abuse knows it, right? It's the same way that immigration status is used as a tool of abuse, right? I'll call the immigration police and tell them that you're undocumented. So it's the same thing. And then this, if you're raised in a family where being good or pure or worthy in the eyes of God is so central to your identity, and then you have someone close to you who you trust, again, that authority figure, right, that you put trust in because they're an authority figure, so they must know what they're talking about, tells you that you will be damned, or you will, God will be disappointed in you, or you won't go to heaven, or whatever that is, then I could see that being extraordinarily powerful. And this is why so many people who have left the religion within which they grew up have struggled with, right? I mean, they count years of counseling or trying to kind of disentangle themselves from that guilt and the power that abusive rhetoric has on them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean that abuse, and it's a little bit different where at least I'm gonna use a funny example of us here around the house and connect it. So the boys and I were sitting on the couch, laying across the couch, watching a movie the other night, and Kendrick kind of kicks me with his feet as he's kind of moving around or whatever. And I said, "Boys, do y'all realize you're the only two people on the planet that have kicked me from the inside and the outside? Like, stop, right?" And I feel similarly about this type of spiritual abuse,
Mm.
especially for Black communities, is that you've kicked us from the outside as white colonists, and now we're
Yeah.
doing it to ourselves from the inside. We're
Mm-hmm.
just replicating the same process. And so, I think what's very important to acknowledge too, especially in religious communities or even just independently, as someone who feels strongly about their spirituality, but they're just not connected with a community now or yet, is that the history. The history is, especially when it comes to Black preachers, Black teachers, Black pastors, because reading was illegal at a point in time in this country. If you could, in fact, read, that meant that obviously you were in a position of power. You
Right.
could more easily transfer information. You could more easily translate whatever God may be saying to an entire congregation, so forth. So a function, a sidearm of enslavement was a internal hierarchy of knowledgeable individuals. Like that's the reason why Black folks don't care what folks say about policies of screaming and hollering at the graduation, is because we know how important that commencement is, because there was a point in time where we didn't have information,
Mm-hmm.
and it was structural and systemic to not get it to us. And so with that, when you have that power of information and others don't during that time period, it's still trickling down to now, as if only one person or a couple of people have access to direct access to spirituality without a middle person. And so with that, they have this type of control that they try to wield unless you know better, unless you
Mm-hmm.
are well versed, unless you are simply well read. I'm not saying everybody go run out and get an MDiv. I'm just simply saying that um, the disempowerment is systemic, and it came from the outside and now it's on the inside and it's
Mm-hmm.
glorified. It's like out. This is a little known Black fact, y'all. There's still communities where in a Black religious community, whoever the pastor is, it's kind of a nickname of, "Hey doc, how you doing?" Even though they don't have a doctorate. It's because they are the doctor of the house. They're the healer of the house. They're
Okay.
the most knowledgeable of the house. And so someone will approach someone and say, "Hey doc." Now, I'm the asshole in the pulpit that will say, good morning, Mr. or Mrs. So and so, and will not use doc if they have not earned it. But I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just saying I'm being accurate.
You're
Call it
being
that.
accurate. Yeah.
I'm being accurate, right? But that is a tradition, right? That's a
Mm-hmm.
tradition of putting someone on a pedestal in such a way that it's creating the conditions under which the spiritual abuse can happen. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get. That's what I'm trying to get at. And so the fallout of it, Lisa, is folks that are anxious when it comes to even approaching any type of religious leader, spiritual leader, or
Mm-hmm.
a physical edifice, house of worship, overthinking any and everything that's connected to religiosity at all.
Yeah.
Having spiritual OCD on specific things. So I will use this version of Holy Writ, but I won't use that one. Or I need to know the literal translation. I need to know the Hebrew and Greek of this one word. And I
Mm-hmm.
get so far into it that I can never really apply it to my life because I'm so afraid to use it wrong. Like these are all outgrowths of spiritual abuse. And so the reason why I thought it was important to bring up, Lisa, is because for a number of reasons, especially here in the United States. There are a lot of people that are going through a lot of things. And as they are going through a lot of things, they are literally seeking the quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
balm in Gilead. They're looking for something that helps to heal them or give them resilience or at least give them some flicker of hope. We've talked about that on this podcast too.
Yeah.
We got that little flicker that hasn't gone out
Yeah.
yet. They go to these spiritual people, places, and things in order to give them some scaffolding while we're going through the bullshit, right? Well, what
Mm-hmm.
happens when the scaffolding is indeed weak in and of itself or
Right.
harmful?
Yeah.
That's what I just want people to be aware of as I'm thinking about it. And so, knowing where there are places and spaces that are healthy for you, uh, religiously, spiritually, or otherwise. I'm not necessarily saying comfortable. It doesn't always have to be a bed of roses, but I am saying that are we keeping our eyes open and being vigilant around what we thought would be helpful? So, Lisa, this was about 3 weeks ago. My grandmother had a infection in her foot, and so she had to take a particular medication to help get rid of this infection so it wouldn't get worse and so forth. And y'all got to remember, she'll be 101 in August, right? She took this medication, and I thought it was really curious that the nurse told her as they were leaving the doctor's office, all right, now, so if this makes her sick, y'all bring her right back, okay? What the hell? First of all, that's common sense. But even if it's not common sense, it was almost as if they were telling us this almost like 50-50 chance this is going to make you sick. It's supposed to make you better, but it might make you sick, right? And that's kind of how I feel about this whole spiritual abuse piece of things. It's like, if you're going through a lot, which many of us are, and you're looking to spiritual things to support you, I feel like pay attention. It's a 50% chance it'll make you well. There's a 50% chance
Right.
it's going to make you sick. And so pay attention and be vigilant around what are some of the side effects that may be coming up because you thought it was good for you and it may not be. Or
Mm.
it's something that's great for you. You need to keep on taking it. But either way, be vigilant. That's what I'm saying, Lisa. Be vigilant. I think that's a fair
Yeah.
request.
And I think sometimes it might be hard to identify
Mm-hmm.
spiritual abuse, right? And so
Yeah.
I would suggest that any kind of spiritual leader or guide or connection shouldn't make you feel like a crappy person, right? It might make you think or maybe that discomfort, but you shouldn't walk away
Mm-hmm.
feeling guilty like you're a bad person and you're going to hell or whatever that manifestation looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
so
right.
that
That's
I
right.
think that could be one way. Because what would you say, Shauna? Like if you're so used to spiritual leaders or religious texts being forthright and assertive and don't do this but do this, and if you do this you're a bad person, and that's your whole
Mm-hmm.
long your whole life, how do you what switch do you need to turn on so that you recognize that that's actually not great, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just even thinking about, I mean, there's so much to that question, but the place I would start is thinking about where are those places of hope, right? Because I did when I was growing up, I lived under that fire and brimstone preaching of let me tell
Mm-hmm.
you all the things that are scary and all the reasons why you're going to hell, right? versus the hear all the great things about being in relationship with something and someone bigger than you.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the consolation of that. Here's what my grandfather, one of his favorite songs in church was "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." Fire and brimstone ain't talking about no friends,
Right.
but friendship would be very nice in a political and social environment like we have now, where people are feeling isolated, they're feeling alone. You're
Mm-hmm.
sitting at home quarantined in the middle of a pandemic 6 years ago, and it would really be nice to have a connection with a friend, personal or spiritual.
Yeah.
I'm very cautious as to where are we talking about the hope and the, I don't want to say positive because there's too many people that talk about real things that are negative when they're just factual. But what I will say is, where's the hope and where's the next step?
Okay.
Right? Because usually what happens is, let me scare you to death so you don't do anything and you freeze.
Okay.
Hope is, here's the possibilities for you. And so this is what you do next.
Mm-hmm.
Freezing, it's almost like Black Panther, when they told Black Panther don't freeze, y'all. I mean, hope comes where it gives you further instruction. So it's kind of like where I'm gonna mess up Dr. King's great quote, but it's talking about you don't know the full staircase, but as long as you can see the next step. Hope is talking about next steps. You don't need to see the whole plan. But if someone's telling you you don't need the whole step and you don't need the whole staircase because you're going to hell anyway, no, that's not helpful. That's abusive. That's and it will be masked in accountability. It will be masked in
Okay.
uh, membership rules within your particular
Mm-hmm.
house of worship. And I'm a big fan of accountability, and at the same time, I'm a very big fan of hope.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like in the workplace where you're giving somebody inactionable feedback. You know, Lisa, you're just very difficult to work with. Okay, that's inactionable. First of all, I don't think that's true. But secondly, if you do, it's not actionable. She can't do anything about your
Right.
opinion,
Yeah.
right? Give me actionable hope where there's something I can do as I'm anticipating life, the world, my situation, my home to get better. Fear is not the place to be at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because Lisa, you would say this, in practically every other form of abuse, the goal is to get someone alone and get them not to take action.
Right. Yeah.
That would be a theological perspective as well. Let me get them, Helen Brimstone would say, let me get them to think they're alone and let me disempower them so they don't do anything to get themselves out of their current situation.
Mm-hmm.
Classic abuse.
Yeah.
Classic abuse. It's just a matter of which flavor of abuse you're tasting at that point.
Right.
So,
Okay. That's helpful.
yeah. So, some things to think about there. But let's get into phase two.
Okay, so we're taking a left-hand turn here, away from spiritual abuse, but it kind of, the first phase did also connect with that social proof, I think, but this one also very much so connects with social proof. So you may or may not have heard, Shauna, that there is new outrage for people who are ideologically on the right or probably far right about the soon-to-be released movie The Odyssey, which is an adaptation of Homer's poem. It's about the return of Odysseus to his family after he had been away fighting the Trojan War, which you all probably know, the Trojan War, right, with the horse and everything. And so his journey home takes him 10 years. And so Matt Damon is Odysseus, so that's the main character, and there's a ton of other people, but the outrage is around two particular characters. So the first is that Lupita Nyong'o, I think is how you say her name. She was cast, or is cast, is playing Helen of Troy. Helen of Troy is the most beautiful woman in the world. And obviously Lupita is Mexican Kenyan, I think. And so the outrage has been around the fact that she is a person of color, and Helen of Troy obviously is a white person. And a lot of the outrage has been coming from Elon Musk, but this is how it's like tidal waving online, right? No one is really paying attention to the fact that the Odyssey is a poem. It is a story. These people are not real. Um, and so, just a quote here from one of the articles I'll put in the show notes. So, apparently, Elon Musk said Chris Nolan is pissing on Homer's grave. Chris Nolan has shown contempt for the Greek people. And so these complaints have garnered tens of thousands of likes and reposts. Yet Musk doesn't seem terribly bothered by Matt Damon's role as Odysseus, despite the actor's lack of Mediterranean ancestry, which I thought was kind of funny. So, how I got onto this was an Atlantic article by Thomas Chatterton Williams, and he is saying that this kind of like indignation that's so selective, and also because it's a fictional character, is just again really troubling around why people are spending their time getting outraged at something like this. And then the other character is Achilles, who has been rumored to be played by Elliot Page. So Elliot Page is a transgender man, and so all of the homophobes and transphobes have been out en masse talking about how problematic it is that Christopher Nolan cast Elliot Page in this role. Elliot Page is in the film, but it is unconfirmed what role they're actually playing. But again, you just have this idea about what Greek mythology should look like. And so this was another quote from that Atlantic article. He says, Nolan's critics seem to be committing themselves to the idea that Zeus, the god of gods, the one-time waterfowl, was quote-unquote white. His offspring, therefore, could not possibly be portrayed by someone with dark skin, right? So they're assigning a racial identity to this fictional character written by a Greek poet however many years ago, and then getting all up in arms about it now. And then obviously, how could we possibly have a queer or trans character within Greek mythology? Because that's obviously not real. And so anyway, so there's that. And then you shared with me that Quinta Brunson of Abbott Elementary fame is also going to be playing Betty Boop in a movie in partnership with the grandson of the creator, Max Fleischer. And so an interesting piece there that I pulled from the Daily Beast, which is like a pretty left-leaning online magazine, but I think it's, I can't imagine this is incorrect. Although Fleischer never said the character was based on a single person, the closest inspiration was black jazz singer Esther Jones, according to the Daily Beast, and a 1934 reporting by the New York Times. So that's really interesting. I didn't know that. And then also Quinta Brunson looks a bit like Betty Boop because she has the big eyes, and when she does her hair with those curls,
and her face is very symmetrically round like Betty Boop. Yep, absolutely.
So, again, I think that we have this dual reality. We have the interwebs where you just have all of these rage baitas and angry people from the ideological right, and then similarly on the ideological left. But like, I don't think the average person is thinking about Helen of Troy, Achilles, and Betty Boop, right? But it's just this same recurring annoyance like Musk. So Musk is the example of social proof. Elon Musk is very rich, very famous, runs these massive businesses, was a big player early on in the current administration. And so when he says something, it has power of fact. And then thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people disseminate that information as though it is stone cold truth. And that's a huge problem. And so I think both of the actors are not really on purpose, are not really responding to or giving air to these issues related to the movie. But it's an age-old issue, right? We talked about The Little Mermaid and Halle Bailey, and how people were like so upset that this fictional Hans Christian Andersen character, a mermaid, was being played in the live action by a young person of color. So anyway, what are your thoughts, Shauna?
Well, anytime there is a interruption to someone's preconceived notions that they are firmly committed to, they are going to, just lock on it like a pit bull when it comes to their their ideology of things. Like it, I'm just thinking about all the different ways. Like it's an interruption in one's thought that, oh, there could be a black mermaid. Oh, there could be a person of color that's Helen of Troy. Like
Right.
it's interrupting something that really is fictitious to begin with. So it's like it's almost like a fork in the road where some people are locked in, like, oh my God, no, Helen of Troy cannot be a woman of African American or African descent or just non-white, period. Yeah,
Yeah.
pick one, right? So, oh, that absolutely cannot happen. And then you've got other people in that fork in the road that says, oh, well, why not? Like, why not? There's absolutely nothing that says this fictional character can't be any ethnicity, background, or
Right.
biologically physical representation that they want. They literally could pick anybody, and so that has the skill set to pull off the character. But my point being is that people are ticked off when their fictional personal narrative gets interrupted that was
Mm-hmm.
never true or never locked in to begin with. So I'm not
Right.
saying that you can't have a white mermaid either, but the fact that you thought for decades that a mermaid had to be white, and now I'm
Right.
interrupting that is the problem now.
Yeah.
And thinking about um, the obviously the lack of representation in all those visual places and spaces is pretty paramount here. But at the same time, it's like, do you ever get to do you ever get to be the minority, right? Like, do you ever get to be in a place and
Mm-hmm.
space where it's like, oh, I never realized that this particular group, race, gender, what have you, has not been represented. Like, you are so used to seeing yourself all the time.
Yeah.
And it's an offense to you when now we're saying, oh, we need a few characters to not represent you. Let us show you something different. Like, I mean, it was the same shit they pulled up with Black Panther. And so with that, I think what's going to be powerful is it's kind of like they're pulling a Shonda Rhimes on things with Bridgerton, where it's like
Mm. Okay.
you're some of it is interrupting the the falsehood that you thought that you owned a role or a character. And some of it is simply representing what was already there. Like we've talked about Queen Charlotte and how Queen Charlotte wasn't just a very white European woman. No, she actually was of Ethiopian descent, which is why she has such a beautiful, prominent nose that is very common to Ethiopian folks, especially women. And so with that, it's like, okay, we have this dichotomy of critical thinking where
Mm-hmm.
we're asking people to think about characters in ways that they're not used to and also ways that are accurate, giving the whitewashing of all things.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are ready for that, some people are not. I have friends that were, even when it came to the Little Mermaid, I had friends that were like, oh, interesting. Like it was almost confusion. Like they were trying to rewire their
Mm-hmm.
brain to think, oh my God, I've spent my whole life thinking the mermaid was white. And oh my God, that was one side. And then the other side was like, oh, I'm so excited. We're going to
Yeah.
get a different version of the mermaid. And so when you see people so invested, it's like, I think it's laughable that adults get so up in arms as if there's only one way to be. There doesn't have to be one way to be anything.
Yeah. Well, with Homer's work, right, and the Greeks broadly speaking, it's really interesting this claim on Western civilization and the origins
Mm,
of success and power is always coded as white. But if you think about it geographically, it's same. I mean, Jesus Christ as an actual person that existed didn't come from Greece. I realize that, but the depictions of Jesus Christ are largely white, and that's inaccurate, right? Because of the region of the world in which he lived, he would have darker skin. The same is also true of Greece. So people in Greece are not going to be lily white, right? That is Mediterranean. They're going to have olive or even maybe darker skin, right? So this idea that you have created that because it's Greek, it's European, therefore it is white. And also, You don't have a PhD in ancient Greece. You don't have a PhD in Homer's work or other kind of his contemporaries, right? Like, so you don't know what the shit you're talking about. You're just saying this because you believe it emotionally to be true. And then it's not real. Right? That's the thing that blows my mind is you're
Yeah,
spending time
yeah.
getting angry about something that is fiction.
There you go. There you go. Well, but here we go once again. I mean, I know we just talked a little bit about spiritual abuse and how spiritual things can be this balm during tough times. I also can understand too how entertainment can also be a balm for
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
even though it's fictional. Like my thing is I'm we just had a conversation, Lisa, about the Michael movie in particular, and it's like, all right, let's just sit back and say, sit back and observe to see who thinks that Michael's own nephew shouldn't have played his, like somebody's going to have a problem with everything,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And so with that, the fictional piece is hilarious. It's not like what we talked about before with Harriet being
Mm-hmm.
cast. It's not that at all a real person. We're talking about, like you said, fictional people that people are
Mm-hmm.
married and attached to the version of them in their mind.
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly what it is. And it's so ridiculous to me that a group of individuals who have derided the quote unquote left focus on identity politics and that it's
Mm-hmm.
problematic to focus on identity to then be
Mm-hmm.
so aggressive around their concern that characters in Greek mythology and fairy tales are like the wrong color, right? So how is that not also just identity politics, right? Like it's the same
Oh, it
thing.
is.
It's the same
It
thing that
is.
you've critiqued.
Uh-huh.
And of course there's no self-reflection to understand that because that social proof that you talked about at the beginning is also minimizes critical thinking, right? You stop thinking, you stop being curious, you just assume that something is right. And I feel like we're not getting any better, Shauna. You and I have lamented this for several years on this podcast and off the podcast, right? It just feels like it's getting worse. And I worry that we are,
Mm-mm.
because this online hate and ridiculousness is seeping into the people who have power and can actually create norms and traditions and rules and regulations, right? Versus just being this little echo chamber on the internet. It's now in the mainstream being enacted into policy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and to your point, you're making me think about something else where, you know, yes, the lack of critical thinking, social proof, uh, groupthink, I do think it's making us, how can I say, it's, give me a better word, Lisa. I'm trying not to use handicapping. It's controlling us. It's preventing us from
Limiting, maybe.
thank you, limiting. Yes, that's much better. It's limiting us from understanding other perspectives. It's
Mm-hmm.
limiting, and it's intentionally limiting, and it's being exacerbated by groups of people again who are, it's the social proof of, no, we don't have to consider a non-white mermaid. No, we don't have to. We don't have to do
Right.
that. No, we don't have to witness Bad Bunny on Super Bowl halftime. We're going to just create our own stuff because I don't want to have to critically think through a performance that's not in English and pay attention to the visuals because that's what critical thinking.
Hmm.
I wonder, Lisa, if I've seen this come up in research about children from LGBT families, is that the less oppression you experience, the less you have to critically think.
Mm-hmm.
If you're someone that has to navigate hatred and oppression and exclusion and bias all the time, then it requires another level of thinking that forces you to learn that navigational capital of how to get through, move around, over and under systems that aren't going anywhere quickly. hopefully they're improving, but they're not going anywhere quickly. So how do we navigate? Well, that takes much more thinking than going directly where it's like, think about it, Lisa. Think about you've gone the same place every day for 20 years on a job.
Mm-hmm.
And on the 21st year, you got to take a detour, Lisa. You got to go a different way because we got construction this way. You got to go a different way. Well, oppressed people, oppressed groups, we're on detours every day. We never go
Right.
anywhere directly. So it doesn't require to think, okay, oh my God, okay, I need to go over that bridge, around that corner, take a left, and then I'll get there. White folks are just on the highway. Men are just on the highway. They're just from A to B all the time. That doesn't require a whole lot of critical thinking. You can put the car in cruise and just let it go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mentally or physically, either or literally. And so with that critical thinking, it just enables it more and more. And my dad said the other day, he said, we just keep getting dumber and dumber as a country. We just keep getting dumber and dumber. And I think the dumber defined is getting more comfortable with being ignorant about topics.
Right.
If I don't know about it, I don't have to be held accountable for it. If I don't know about it,
Yes.
I don't have to act accordingly. So the
Yeah.
less I know, the more I can do whatever I wanted to do anyway.
Yeah, it's not an IQ issue, right? Or
Not at
intellect.
all.
It's a lack of desire to grow and learn because you're so entrenched in the belief that you're right about X, Y, and Z. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Exactly.
you're it just reminds me that movie, I can't remember if we've talked about it on here, Idiocracy. It was Luke Wilson several years ago. And basically he's in a Maya Rudolph's in it too, I think, and they're basically in these
Uh-huh.
like frozen pods, and then they wake up X number of years later, and the whole civilization has devolved. And so they're like pretty average intelligence for when they were, and now they're like the smartest people. And it just feels a little bit like that, although that is an extreme representation, but
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. No, it
yeah.
it it reminds me of when I miss my friend Belinda so much. I'll talk to you soon. Belinda and we'd been showing up to the same group open water swim for years and years and years. And it was one particular season where, we're swimming along and she came after I was already in the water, so I didn't even realize that she was there, but I recognized her particular swim cap. And so we're literally treading water in the middle of a river, like, hey, girl, that type of thing. And one of the kayakers was like, all right, ladies, move along, move along. The rest of the swim is following y'all. It's like, what? And when we thought about it, literally, we were the most experienced swimmers there because everyone else was
Mm-hmm.
relatively new, or they were swimmers, but new to open water, that type of thing. And it's like, okay, at what point do we let the experienced people, first of all, do they realize how experienced they are? And when are we going to let them lead the way?
Yeah.
Because we are very, very entrenched right now in this country. And I've said it during facilitations and other places. We're very entrenched in intentionally stripping expertise and knowledge away from people that have earned it and letting them lead
Yes.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. We are,
Very intent on it.
yeah, that hundreds of thousands of people with all that historic knowledge gone from the federal government, among other things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Lisa, I realize that you have worked, you know, 20 plus years in this particular field. You got a whole PhD in this and you've studied all around the world, et cetera, and so forth. But I got Google. So all that,
Yeah. Peace out.
I got
Yeah.
Google. I'm good. It's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not willing to, and even in the face of hearing stuff that I don't want to hear either. Like it's certain opinions where I'm like, oh shoot, I really don't feel this way, but you've got your team has 100 years of cumulative experience in this area, so I'm going to follow suit, despite how I feel about it, despite my opinion about it. I trust your
Right.
expertise more than I trust my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's not happening in this country very often.
No, sadly not
How
anymore.
I feel is more important, Lisa. How I feel.
Yeah. And I am very upset that Helen of Troy is being played by a Mexican Kenyan woman.
Mm-hmm. Like it's taking money out of your pocket personally.
Yep. Yep.
I am offended.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Critical thinking is a superpower, Lisa. I think we should get, I'm telling you, t-shirts, hoodies, mugs. Critical thinking is a superpower. I swear it is.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
y'all. That's a wrap for this week. I need to, I feel like Lisa and I are overthinking to compensate for the lack of critical thinking in this country. That's what I think. That's
Oh,
what I
I
think.
think we're not alone there. There's many other overthinkers with us, which is a good thing, I suppose.
So now that's the type of group think I'm talking about. The overthinkers. Let's
Hmm.
we ride it dawn, y'all. We ride it dawn. Okay. All right. That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Unfazed, Unedited podcast. You can reach us on all of your favorite social media and podcast apps at Unfazed, Unedited. You can email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com or just visit our website and you'll find all the things. Lisa, we're getting close to 250. Cannot believe it. Yeah, almost 250. But you can find all of our podcasts on unfazedpodcast.com. And those are old and new shows as well. So if you like this week's episode, please like, subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends, coworkers, and others in this phase of your life. So keep thinking until next week, y'all.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't turn your brain off.